Talking Nerdcore, Talking Nerdcore today. We're talking Nerdcore, Talking Nerdcore our way. We're talking Nerdcore, Talking Nerdcore today. We're talking Nerdcore, Talking Nerdcore our
Hey guys, how's it going? It's the Overanalyst here, and on today's episode of Talking Nerdcore, I'm going to be talking about Serial Experiments Lain with my guest Sinewave Fox. You want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name's Sinewave Fox. I am a nerdcore artist. I make different kinds of nerdcore music. I've gone through so many genres at this point, I don't even know what to call myself.
You're an indie nerdcore.
Yeah, indie hipster nerdcore. I'm that experimental stuff that you wouldn't know about. Yeah, I've been in the nerdcore community a little over a year now. I've been doing music for way longer than that though. Just kind of found my home here with so many awesome people that I've met, and been doing it since about October of last year. So little hiatus here and there. Still trying to find what works for me as far as like when to put out content, but yeah, that's really all I can say for now.
No, that's cool. So, yeah, I basically reached out to you about Serial Experiments Lain because you just recently put out an EP that's completely based off of this anime. Is that correct?
Yep, definitely. 100%. There is no other anime inspiration in there. It's all 100% Serial Experiments. And I emphasize that because my song Shell, a lot of people think it's a Ghost in the Shell reference when it's not meant to be. But I can see why they think that.
Yeah. So why don't we jump right on into this? So whenever I have a guest on, I pretty much allow them to say whatever they want about the anime, full spoilers in effect. And so why don't you kind of describe Serial Experiments Lain?
That's one of the hardest things I think anyone has ever
right?
asked me to do. It's a wild ride, man. I mean, you said you just finished watching it. I don't know how to begin it, to be honest. So the biggest summary, I guess, the way I could boil it down as simple as possible. And mind you, this series is very complex. There's a lot to pick apart, and it's an acquired taste. A lot of people don't like this show, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the way it starts is you start with this main character. Their name is Lane. They're a kid in high school, just like every other anime. And someone in the school dies. But after they die, that person makes contact with the main character, Lane. And so there's this unraveling of a whole bunch of stuff to basically find out that the internet, which is called the Wired in the series, is basically alive and breathing, and there's various forces within the internet that's trying to pull people out of the real world and pull them into the virtual world. And Lane finds himself in the middle of that. I'm going to not provide too many spoilers because even though you're giving me full permission, I don't want to say too much because it's still one of my favorite series, and I know a few people out there would love to see it going in without any knowledge. But ultimately, Lane finds himself as a big part of this force, and we kind of see how they deal with that, and the consequences of everything unraveling around them. So that's about as basic as it gets, and I also can't emphasize how confusing it actually is to watch. So
it is definitely confusing, because I actually... So my experience is this is about how many pages of notes I had on the show. It's about 18 pages. And I started off with like first episode, I've got like 4 to 6 pages. And then as each episode progressed, I kind of stopped taking as many notes because there was just so much information thrown at me that I'm like, it's almost taking me twice as long to write the notes down than to view the actual episode. Right. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to absorb it halfway through. So
I think that's the best way to go about it. Just kind of take it in. It's one of those shows, and I kind of, they're still very different, but I liken it slightly to Neon Genesis Evangelion, if you've ever seen the original series. That's another one that just kind of goes bonkers the more you watch it. And that's kind of how I feel with Lain. It's just a lot to really take in the first go. It's a series you got to watch more than a few times, I think, to really grasp it. And even then, I still don't fully understand all of it. So
Yeah, well, it's one of those shows where I was watching it and it's like everything feels intentional. Like there's not everything down to the color aspect, to the shading, to the light design, like, where like in my notes I have like very specific scenes where it's like intense light. They're very focused on like the power grid, like the wires and the power grid, and it just shines so bright. And then in contrast with the shadows, I literally have in my notes bloody shadows because for some reason it literally looks like someone just splattered paint in these shadows. So
yeah, I love
very
that effect.
interesting.
Yeah, it's if anything, I suggest it for people just visually. It looks really freaking cool, you know. So even if you're not a fan of like the story itself or doesn't do enough for you, the visuals in itself I think are really cool. There's a lot of cool aesthetics coming from that.
Yeah, and it's actually a 90s anime. So, I mean, it seems limited by its technology, but yet the core theme is still relevant today, which is don't get consumed by the internet, which is even more prevalent today than ever because here we are doing this entire podcast over the internet.
Right. Yeah. That's a big piece of it, I think. I think it's a little more nuanced than just don't get consumed by the internet, which is what really inspired me to make Integrate, which is the project that we're talking about. To me, because I think there's also various ways to interpret that series. It's certainly not clear cut. It's definitely up for debate.
Yeah.
But one of my biggest takeaways from it was there's a lot of forces in the world that want to pull you in, whether that is a community on the internet, whether that's church, school. I mean, working in a capitalistic bureaucratic environment even can be like that. And a lot of it is really enticing. You want to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And I think it's natural for humans to want to feel that way. We want to be a part of just more than us. Because otherwise it's really lonely, right? If we aren't a part of something bigger. But what I found interesting about that concept was it's not always a good thing. Sometimes we lose ourselves trying to be a part of that greater establishment. So again, whether it's an online community or church or school, whatever it is, there's certainly an obstacle there, I think, for a lot of people. And compromises you have to learn to make sometimes to be a part of those greater entities. And so I just kind of explore that idea, and particularly with the internet, because that paralleled a lot of things going on with my life at the time that I was really writing those lyrics, and just kind of went with that and made some of the craziest shit I've ever made.
Yeah, well, and some of my favorite lyrics from those songs, and it's something that I think I noticed you repeated a couple times, is "You are not alone." Just kind of this repetition of "you are not alone," and it felt very welcoming, and that's kind of a lot of the feeling that I get in this anime sometimes, mainly when it comes with the character Arisu, who is one of the schoolgirls that sees our main character. Let's see now what our main character's named Lain. It's literally based off of the title of the anime, and Lain is super awkward in episode 1. She doesn't know hardly anything about the world. In fact, Lain doesn't even know that a student committed suicide the week before. So already red flags are kind of going off. And Arisu basically invited Lain to go to a club, which I thought was really weird. But I might get into that a little bit later. But basically, Arisu is pretty much like, hey, I see you're awkward. I kind of want to be friends with you. Let's actually just hang out for once. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. And when Lane starts getting obsessed with the computer stuff, she starts distancing herself from Arisu. And we kind of get to see that dynamic of like how much Arisu really cares about Lane, but there's only so much she can really do in the end.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect. I'd say that particular aspect isn't one I really explored myself. The other people that might be reaching out to you, for instance, like Arisu reaching out to Lane, because I'll add to what you said. Another thing that you see as the series progresses is that while Lane becomes a little more distant from her friends, at the same time they when they do hang out with them, they start seeming like a totally different person. And so out of that, to me, is the idea of crisis of identity, that neither you nor the people around you really have a full understanding of who you actually are at the core. And what I really liked about Serial Experiments was it made the viewer confused about who Lane is.
Yeah.
You don't really quite get it because there's so much happening. And you just see like these various personalities coming from this one entity, and you're just like, well, is this Lane like the one that we knew in episode 1? Is this a different one? Like, what is going on here? And
there's characters referring to her even like, hey, I just talked to you in the pub, and she's like, what are you talking about? I've never been here before.
And so we see this convergence, I guess, of the virtual world and the physical world, which was another big inspiration for Integrate, because what I find in a lot of online communities, since being like a content creator that's had a little bit of a spotlight on them, I'm certainly still a small artist, but even just the little bit of attention that I've gotten, it really just kind of changed my perspective of the world. It opened up a lot of questions for me, and then I started asking questions about myself, like, I'm very performative when I stream, but I might be so freaking depressed that day that it's all a facade. And then I, go through my days trying to make myself work and do things that I don't want to do, related to content creation. And you find, I guess, some people, I did, I found myself in a place where, I didn't quite know if this is me. Like, is this performative version of myself really me? And now my relationships that I have with people, am I being performative? Like, am I being true to myself anymore? I don't really know, because my actions have blended in so many different ways, both online and in the physical world. And I don't think I articulated any of that well enough. But
no, I'm actually following you pretty well, because I've personally felt some of that myself. And I mean, for me, it's kind of like, because I do the reactions, and I've noticed that the reactions that do better are the ones that I'm more physical, or I'm almost more performative about. Like, if I'm doing a Divide Music reaction, for example, then I'm basically breaking down every single little thing that he does. But I can't do that with every single song, and it's draining. And sometimes I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about, and yeah, it's one of those where it's like, is this really what I want to go for? Or,
And I'll even liken this too, to like the workforce. I've been working for many years now, outside of music, and there have been a few jobs where the expectation really is that you kind of put your everything into your job, especially in the environment that I grew up in. And I think just as you tell yourself that you need to be this driving force, or not even necessarily a driving force, but just being a cog in whatever machine you're in, that itself can just change who you are. Particularly when I actually did insurance for a few years, worst time of my life, by the way. But that was one of those things where like it it was my career, so I was putting everything into it, even though I hated it. And it made me jaded because I hated that line of work. It was a very terrible line of work to be in. And it ultimately just shaped my interactions, both there at work and then, outside of work. And so same thing with online content creation. I think there's just a lot of parallels to any of these things, which is again was my biggest inspiration for writing Integrate.
And to kind of go off of that whole point of like your job is almost consuming your life there. Like I've had jobs where like I feel like I'm not a decent person, or I feel like I'm not of status or whatnot unless I'm complaining about my job constantly, or like I'm trying to prop myself up with my job, and it's to the point where it's like my job defines my life, and I've hated that. I've actually had to quit those type of jobs. And it was just like stupid minimum wage jobs, like warehouse working. Like things like it would stress me out because it would be like very physical type of work, and got upper management wanting me to do all sorts of stuff. And it's like, why am I basing my entire life around this job? And so that's why I quit it and started doing theater work. And now I do a lot of theater work. I do like light design and stuff. So I'm starting to find my own place in the world, which is a lot better for me.
Feels good, right?
Yeah.
And to go back to what one of the things you mentioned was one of the lyrics you resonated with was you do not have to be alone. And how welcoming that feels. The I guess intention behind that is for it to sound that way, but it can sometimes be malicious. So in reference to Serial Experiments, for instance, the internet sucking people in, making them, like in episode 1, kill themselves to be a part of it is not a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So the point of that whole phrasing, and that's part of the whole mantra of that EP, which is, it doesn't have to feel so empty. You do not have to be alone. It can be, and ultimately should be, a welcoming thing. But as we mentioned with our jobs, with content creation in certain instances, sometimes that can lead to things that we don't quite want or need. So I thought that was a really cool thing to explore as well, because I think Lain does that very well, because you can clearly see different benefits to being a part of The Wired, being bigger than yourself, having this presence that's really big digitally. And I mean, Lain ultimately gains a lot of power. I will let people watch it to figure out what happens in the end.
A lot of power. And it's actually interesting because early on they say that people on the internet are often like opposites of what they are in real life. And that is exactly what Lain is, where Lain in real life is awkward, kind of antisocial, and then she starts becoming a lot more powerful, like you said, and you get to see confidence grow in Lain as the series progresses. And I've made notes about that. I was like, holy crap, Lain is starting to look a little demented here. Like, is this evil Lain? Is this good Lain? I'm not even sure anymore.
Yeah, and I think the lines of what's wrong and right in that universe are definitely blurred in that series as well. It's very, very open to interpretation, very subjective for sure.
One thing that I want to bring up, since this is just something that I've noticed as we were talking, is that I tend to refer to Lain as she because it looks very much feminine, and I think you've been referring to Lain as they. Is there like any reason for that, or just curious?
Just in general, I'm trying to minimize my use of he, she more, just because I'm more aware, that people don't identify, on a binary spectrum like that anymore. So I try to just say they as much in general, just to not assume anything. Or I mean, it wouldn't be wrong to say she in that case, that all the characters referred to Lain as she, but it's just a habit I'm trying to get into.
Okay, that's fair enough. I just wanted to state that mainly for our audio only auditors who was like, why are we referring to two different people? We're not, but that's completely cool with me. So
Yeah, see, when you grow up in the southern United States like I did, and you were taught to say yes, ma'am, yes, sir to everything, it's a hard habit to break. I gotta say.
yeah, definitely. I haven't grown up in Southern that, but I have been taught manners, and that's definitely something that I personally am very keen on, is just saying the yes, sir, yes, ma'am. But anyways, so back to Serial Experiments Lane. One other thing, or one other character I kind of want to bring up is the sister, Mika, which is, she's an interesting character because in the beginning, Mika, I wasn't sure what was going on with her. It felt very much like Mika didn't exist at all. Like her parents didn't hardly interact with her. She would often just not eat anything and leave. And then halfway through, she started interacting with her parents again. And then suddenly there's two Mikas. And it's like one of them takes over and kills the other one. It's really bizarre halfway through what happens to Mika. And she kind of goes into this kind of coma. You think you can elaborate on that? Or what you think about the character in general?
So that's one character and one piece of the story I've not quite pieced together.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to pretend like I know the answers or have some enigmatic interpretation of that. I'm really not sure. That's one of the pieces of the story that still leaves me a little puzzled about what her role really is, why she's there. Because as you learn, the family construct there is not as well. I won't say much more there. Her existence, you find out, is puzzling in and of itself. So I don't have an answer for you for that one, unfortunately.
No, that's cool. I figured that's gonna happen. But yeah, it's just very interesting because at first I was like, okay, Mika seems to be catching on to something with Lane. I don't know why I keep forgetting Lane's name, but keeps catching on to something with Lane. And then we have this weird scene where in Shibuya, Lane is in the middle, just kind of letting cars almost hit her, and Mika's there, like someone just hands her a piece of paper that says fulfill the prophecy. So that whole scenario is like, fulfill the prophecy. What prophecy?
Yeah, so the prophecy thing is not explicit at all. And I'm one of those people that doesn't really watch like breakdowns of anything.
Yeah.
I just kind of like to sit in my head and think about it. So I haven't really looked too much into the prophecy thing either. Because there is a point where you think that Lane is like almost bullying her sister too, or like torturing her for some reason. It doesn't really quite make sense. That's one of the pieces and all that, again, with her role that I need to re-explore. So I'm sorry I don't have better answers or ideas for those things.
And it's real interesting because a lot of my questions are also that I wrote down are stupid little things that kind of get answered at the end, which is like, why in the hell does Lane even have this setup, this gigantic ass computer setup in her room? Why is her parents allowing this? Why is there water on her floor and she's allowing electricity all around it? Like, I'm sitting here, all these kind of like stupid normal questions, like, why is this a thing? And they don't directly answer it at the end, but you can kind of start piecing things together. Why? So.
Yeah, as far as like the accumulation of extra electronics, I just think it's one of those things that we don't really need the answer to, I guess, in my opinion.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, there's lots of little things that you can pick apart and detail in that series, which is one of the reasons I like it. I actually really enjoy those types of media where you are kind of confused at the end. You don't quite get it, but you know you liked everything you saw.
Yeah.
So now you want to go back and rewatch it.
I love the soundtrack to this show. There was one episode where like the first half of the episode was just a pure electric guitar. And I was just vibing out to that guitar the entire episode. I was just like, it's so good.
It's a very unique soundtrack. I definitely not anything else like I've heard in anime before.
And it's got that very ominous feel, which is kind of the point. Like it's supposed to feel irritating, not irritating, but just like on edge.
Yeah. A little bit eerie, you know, like there's definitely something going on behind the scenes all the time.
Definitely. All right. Let's see now. What do you think of the Inn Siberia? Or not the Inn. It's a club. It's called Siberia.
What do I think about it?
Yeah. You have any thoughts, period? I know it's kind of a weird question.
I mean, it's cool. I guess. I guess what's a little strange about it is it's like a club, but there's like kids in it.
That was I literally wrote that down. It's like, why are there kids here?
But that might just be a cultural thing. I don't know, like if like kids have like clubs like that in Japan, like for younger kids. Like for me growing up, when I was in like middle school is what we call it here in the U.S.
Yep.
We went to like the roller skating rink. That was like the hangout. So it wasn't, and it was kind of like a club because they would have music blasting and lights, and there was a dance floor. So you know, it was a little weird because it's like this looks like an adult club, but again, that might just be some like difference I don't really know about there in Japan. But I didn't really think too much else of it. So
yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I thought it was kind of weird because like they had like this kind of weird drug dealing going on in there where this dude, he basically consumes like a microchip that speeds his brain up. They call it an Excel. And
Excella.
Yeah. And that's one of those topics. There are several topics in Experiments Lain where they talk about it once or twice and then they don't cover it again. And that was one of those where this dude takes Excella and then goes crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, they have people dealing the Excella, and you're right. It just kind of like seems to make them go crazy. But it has some connection to the Wired, and I think specifically the Knights, which is another one of those things that doesn't get talked about too much in the actual series. So it's, as far as its like relevance and like does it have any like deeper meaning, I'm sure it does. Again, Lain is just so layered with different things in it. There's some metaphor or something for that specifically. I don't know exactly what the show is going for. But yeah, the scenes particularly with the Excella, because the guy like goes nuts and like takes out a gun or whatever,
start shooting people,
and you seeing like Lane's reaction, I think was really interesting, because you see basically this person be like totally seemingly unfazed by the whole thing. And they do actually go back to Siberia later, the club, where Lain totally acts differently in that setting as well. So I think that establishment of the scene was to really hone in on the dichotomy of the changing of Lane's personality. But the Excella itself, I definitely would love to know more about that. That is one of the flaws, I guess, of Lain, is that it will bring up a lot of stuff, and you really have to either piece together things by watching it a bunch of times, or you just kind of have to speculate, because it really just doesn't go into a lot of detail. It might be one of those where it goes into more detail, maybe the manga, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, well, I also read something that there was a video game as well called Lain that the anime was also trying to promote a little bit as well. It has like a similar story, but it's different. completely different characters and type. So,
Yeah, I don't know anything about the game. I've only ever seen the series. Haven't even read the manga. In fact,
I
I'm
mean,
terrible at reading manga, so
I read a decent amount of manga. So,
I've read one manga in its
hmm
entirety in my entire life, and it was very short. It was the
okay.
Neon Genesis manga. It's only 14 volumes. But literally, the only other manga I've read was like from Shonen Jump when I was like a kid.
I
Otherwise, I
understand.
just watch anime.
I completely understand. Sometimes I just do the manga because it's quicker. Although in this instance, I think
Yeah.
the anime was a whole lot quicker. So,
See, and
yeah.
the anime I like to watch are these shorter ones that are only like 12 episodes long.
hmm
You start making your shit like almost 30 episodes and you start losing me.
Yeah.
It's like that's why I can't keep up with like all these new ones coming out, Jujutsu Kaisen, the 700,000th episode of One Piece. Like I just
Yeah.
can't do all that.
Yeah, I understand. I got into One Piece only because I started listening to a podcast that did it weekly, and so it felt like I can follow along with the podcast.
Hmm.
Okay, so one other conversation that was really interesting after the guy goes crazy is that basically Arisu and her friends go and talk with Lane, and her friends are like, you know, we just saw a guy die, but it doesn't feel real. It feels like a movie. And I thought
Hmm.
that was just a very interesting conversation because normally I would expect them to be like grieving or something, but it seemed like they were just more in shock or in denial than anything.
Yeah, and that's a great point because that scene in particular to me I found really fascinating. And the way I interpreted all of that was the series touching on the idea of uh, desensitization. Am I
Mm-hmm.
saying that right? Um, Whereas a consequence of us seeing all kinds of shit on the internet, when we see it in real life, it might not feel as dramatic as it would have otherwise. And I find that as a very interesting thing about the internet in general, about human psychology. Because I often wonder too, after all the, violent movies I've seen, if I see
Mm-hmm.
someone, get blown up or something in front of me, something crazy, like how am I really going to feel about it? Is it going to feel different because I saw it in person when it looks real enough on the movie screen?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good parallel too to the idea of not really knowing yourself, right? um, and not really understanding how you feel about certain things and how to interpret the reality around you even. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what's one of the brilliant points of Lane is that it does throw a lot at you, but I think it all really ties in and funnels into that central piece, which is just understanding who you are and understanding reality around you.
Yeah, and actually that's a very good point about understanding yourself because that's something that Lane struggles with a lot when she's going like who am I when she finds out like a very core piece of herself. It like destroys her world because she's sitting there like what is real, what isn't because she's basically almost combining the wired world into the real world and the lines become blurred as in like here in reality I can definitely tell I'm on the internet and when I'm not on the internet, but in the anime those lines get blurred to the point where you're sitting there and you're like I have no idea what's real and what's not anymore.
Hmm. Yep, and the one of the monologues that Lane actually has, I used a snippet of that in the first track, "Weird."
Mm-hmm.
Which, fun fact, the first episode
It's
is
called
called "Weird,"
yep.
which is why I titled that song the way I did. It also has power lines in it, in case you didn't quite catch that at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a snippet of one of their dialogues there at the end. A rough translation, I don't remember what they actually say in Japanese, but it's just, "But who is the real me?" And
Mm-hmm.
then it goes into the next track right after that.
Yeah, so it's very very interesting theme. So, is there any other themes that you enjoy about the anime?
Um, well, I go into a lot more depth about the themes that I specifically pulled from the show to create the album and the commentary version of Integrate. That was on the USB drives that I sold, but also people can actually buy that commentary version as well on sinewavebox.com. If you buy the digital version, I will send you the commentary version as well. It's about as long as the EP is, just talking about the various themes and things that inspired me to do the things that I did for that project. So if anyone's really interested in me going more in depth, I would highly suggest that, not to do a shameless plug. But
plug yourself. Go for it. Go for it. I literally got your hoodie merchandise.
Oh, let's go.
Lap. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you, by the way.
Yeah, I thought about wearing it because I've done it on other streams, and then I'm like, I literally disappear when I'm wearing it, so I'm not going to wear it today. Plus, it's hot in my room.
Fair enough. But yeah, no, I guess I will just reiterate, though, you know, away from the advertisement now, just other themes. The way I write my music, I call it nerdcore because what I write is inspired mostly from anime or video games or movies even. But one thing I try to make very apparent is that I don't want it to only relate to people that watch anime. So the way I write my lyrics is for hopefully anybody to sit down and listen to. So if you are someone who, you know, can relate to what we've talked about here, struggling with your identity, not really understanding the world around you, having a hard time connecting with people, because that's one of the other big themes of the EP is connection with other people. Then I would love for you to check out the album because I'm right there with you. The whole EP is ultimately about connection and understanding reality. So if you vibe with any of that and you like screaming metal music mixed in with a little bit of electronics and soft stuff, then Integrate's for you, I guess.
Definitely.
This is why I'm not a salesman. Right? I tried sales once and I did a terrible job. So
no, I completely get it because like I'm terrible at promoting my own stuff anyways. So I totally understand that pain. So let's see now. I'm just kind of scrolling through my notes. There's also kind of an interesting phenomenon that happens in the show called Phantoma. It's this virtual reality video game that people participate in, and then they end up accidentally killing people in real life. And that was just a very interesting phenomena that I really like. It's kind of almost going into the VR type stuff, but it wasn't even VR. It was just people seeing things.
Yeah, that's actually a version of augmented reality, which I think is what like Facebook and Meta is trying to like start up now, is trying to actually implement stuff like that. That was one of like the first time I watched the series. That was one of the scenes that like blew my mind. I was like, holy shit, this guy just killed this person in real life. They thought they were, you know, fighting some video game character. And then they, you know, end up murdering someone, which again, just ties in that theme of, you know, what's real, what isn't.
And I noticed that
two different things coming together.
I noticed that they tied that video game to kids.
Yes.
That whole capitalistic approach almost of just like, we're going to gear everything towards kids. And it's almost like brainwashing the kids a little.
Get them while they're young. Yep. That's what they say.
And that was just a real whole interesting adventure. And then with Lain going in, trying to research the game and why it's targeting kids, and the whole experimentation behind that was insane.
And I think one of the things you could take away from all of that as well is Lain is realizing that because this Phantoma game it's part of the Wired or the internet. And this is becoming a space where Lain has a lot of influence. And so they're seeing a piece of essentially their community or what they're a part of that's doing a terrible thing. And so you kind of have to watch how they deal with that. and what choices they make. And this is, when the series really starts touching on, now ethics and morality is starting to get blurred with everything else converging into one thing. So it's very interesting. This is why I love the series, because I love thinking about this kind of stuff. I love science. I love philosophy. I love learning about religions. In fact, I hardly watch AniTube at all. Mostly what I watch is based on those things: science, philosophy, religion type stuff. It's just all really fascinating to me.
Yeah, and the show has a really huge core aspect of it really questions what is God, which is it's prevalent throughout the entire show. And even at the end where you're sitting there, I'm like, is this God? Is this God? We have people with God complexes, but are they really God? And I think it's fascinating because they don't answer the question. It's like what you said. Sometimes the show shows some things, but it doesn't answer the questions. And I am appreciative of that, just coming from a Christian myself.
Yeah, it definitely asks questions of religion as well. It's so much. There's just so much involved in that show. And I find that particular one interesting as well. I think it's episode 11 or something is even titled Religion.
Yeah.
And
Actually,
yeah,
that's
especially at
episode
the
4.
end there. Oh, it's episode 4. Yeah. So I haven't watched it.
I mean, I literally have my notes in front of me that says episode 4, Religion.
Yeah. So another interesting aspect, definitely.
Yeah, and yeah, because there's scenes where there's these kids that's just randomly worshiping the sky, just out in the middle of the street. He's praise the sky, and you're sitting there what's going on? And Lane can see them, but other people can't, and so you're really sitting there what's going on?
So are they seeing it in real life? Is this a manifestation of the virtual world? What are we looking at? And
Yes.
I love feeling that way. I love being what the fuck?
Or is this a mixture of both? Is Lane kind of literally teetering the line of both the virtual and the real world? It's so so interesting. And I love how they do display the real world, because there's classroom settings where she's sitting in the classroom and all the students are in black. It's just black. They're all focused on one thing. They're all robotic. It's so fascinating to me with that, because it's almost saying real life is mundane. And
That's you can make that argument for sure. And that the only actual stimulation that people are getting is through the wired, and that's a superior form of stimulation rather than the real world, which I think is something to be argued as our technology gets better, because once you can start actually feeling things and smelling things through VR and stuff, I mean, we're going to be making some cool shit as humans in the future. And so I think Lane is definitely ahead of its time in asking a lot of these questions, especially for a show in the 90s when what we even see now today was not prevalent then.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here, I'm wondering, if they do a remake of Lane, what would it look like? Because it's very 90s-esque, so, some of the technology seems obsolete. However, not really, because they still have, phones where you can get email on it, and you can still communicate through phones. In fact, that's very important to Lane. She does a lot of her communication through her phone.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually had a follow-up thought there, and I totally just lost it. I'm gonna have to come back to that.
No, that's completely cool. I do that all the time. So one other thing that I was kind of looking or watching out for in the show was the color red. For some reason, it seems very prevalent on characters who may be fake or whatnot. I've noticed that Lane sometimes wears a red skirt, or I've literally got, it's whenever something happens to someone, they're always wearing red. very fascinating. And I really don't know what the color means. And I figured that's not something you would have noticed. That's just one of the things I picked up on when I was watching. It was like, wow, this color shows up a lot and it seems to be meaningful, but I have no idea what the meaning is.
No, that's really observant. That's not something I noticed, but I kind of want to go back now and pick up on that and see if maybe there is some significance behind that. I think it's part of the school uniform.
Yes, there is a neckerchief
the
that
tie
they all
thing.
wear.
Yeah. And I think Arisu does wear a red dress at
Yes.
one point going to Siberia. So that's interesting. I'll have to go back and pick that apart.
Same thing with Mika. Mika wears a lot of red, almost up to the point where she goes a little crazy.
Yeah, I love that. I'll go back and watch it again and follow up.
And yeah, I'm gonna say, like, even in the beginning, like, we see the girl right about to commit suicide, and you got all of the images of blood, even leading up to before she was doing it. We got images of, like, blood splatter all over the place. So it's very interesting. Like, even like Lane's hair is red. It's got a reddish tinge to it.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
And that could just be some underlying symbol for death or whatever.
or it could just be me looking too much into it. I don't know.
It could just be they wanted everything to be red.
It really could be. I've always hated those English teachers that are like, and they colored the curtains blue because it's supposed to represent peace. And I'm sitting there, it's like, or they just really like the color blue.
Could just be blue because it's blue.
Yeah, but it gave me some of those like Sixth Sense vibes where it's like feels purposeful. If everything else in this anime feels purposeful, this feels purposeful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have picked up on it.
That's fair. Totally fair.
So, want to talk about the Knights for a little bit? The Knights are a very interesting concept because it's like they're against Lane, but on the same time, they're not. They're like a hacker group, and some people refer to them as like worshippers of God, but in the wired sense. So whatever God means in the wired sense. It's very interesting. What do you think about the Knights?
Yeah, the Knights I think are a bit ominous and a bit nebulous. I think they're supposed to be a little mysterious on purpose. And there seems to be, I guess, not a whole lot of unity in their ideology. You kind of have to pick up things here and there because nothing is really explicitly said too much about them. You hear their name a lot, but it's not like this is exactly what they believe at any point or anything. So it's hard. I don't really know how to categorize them. I don't know that they're good, they're bad. I don't even 100% know how they feel about Lane either.
Yeah.
So that's another one of those things like I need to like specifically watch to figure out what the Knights is about.
Oh no, that's completely cool. Like that, it was one of those where I was picking up, and I only really picked up halfway through, where I'm like, wow, they're actually kind of mentioning them a lot, and it's one of those where they have a symbol, and they've been showing the symbol throughout the show, but they never really put a name to the symbol until halfway through. So that's also something to keep an eye out for, because they were kind of showing who were the Knights in real life up until like the end when they all committed suicide all at once.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'll be honest, man. I think you've picked up on way more on this show your first time through than I have in the 3 times through I think I've watched it now.
I mean, it's
very observant.
Well, it's mainly because I took notes. Like, it was that after I watched the first episode without taking notes, and then at the end, I was sitting there, it's like, I need to take notes for this. So I rewatched the first episode with the notes, and then from then on, I literally started picking up on things, because I literally was pausing as I was watching, writing things down and going, wait a minute, there's something weird going on here. And so
kudos to you, man.
Yeah, I
That's
literally
awesome.
wrote down so many questions like, who are the Knights? why is Lane just watching something? It's like,
Definitely did your homework.
yeah. So, there's even the Men in Black. That's literally what I call them, Men in Black, because there were just these suits that just watch her. Like,
Yeah,
who are
those
these guys?
Yeah, I love those guys for no reason. They're cool to me. That, and then the one piece that I'm like 100% have no idea how to piece together is like the aliens.
The random
I know
aliens that just show
I know
up.
everyone listening to this like breakdown at this point is gonna be like, what the hell is this show? We've talked about,
and then there were aliens.
and then aliens, right? There's so much to it. That's why I made the comment of like, I want to go back and specifically watch it to figure out the Knights, because then I want to go back too and specifically watch it to figure out the aliens and then the other stuff. Like, I feel like you have to specifically watch to like really pick up some of those things.
Yeah. Well, and my kind of thinking was that the aliens were more of like kind of a metaphor. I don't think they actually existed. I think it was just something that Lane was seeing because she was going through like her breakdown at the time. It was one of those things where it just felt like she just started seeing things. And it could have also just been someone sending something to her. Like, it really gets really bizarre halfway through.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's bizarre from episode 1 when she literally holds open her hands. There's like slits in her fingertips and light pours out. Yeah. And you're just sitting there like, huh? Okay, she has this power.
What have I gotten myself into with anime this time?
Yeah. And I literally was sitting there, it's like, okay, so she's got some kind of power, and then she never uses it. It just looks cool.
Yeah, I think that was just more like an internal thing that was happening there. Like, we're seeing a dissociation of sorts, or even maybe like a panic attack of sorts. It's definitely representative of something going on up there.
And I think that this anime does that a lot too, where
yes,
they visualize things that she's feeling without actually having her say it. It's that whole case of show don't tell.
Yeah, for sure. I think, is a good way to continue their narrative of blurring what's real and what isn't. So
yeah, and part of me is also sitting there is like, okay, let's say everything in the beginning was real, was factually true. Is she going through some PTSD, or is she going through some, like, denial of her friend? I won't even say friend, but of the classmate committing suicide. Like, that's a very hard thing to overcome. Maybe she's overcoming denial and starting to escape into the peace computer. Who knows?
Maybe. Who knows?
I mean, she didn't even recognize the name, so maybe I'm just making something out of nothing there, but I don't know.
Yeah. There's like you said, a lot of, if not most of what you see is definitely intentional with that series. So I think any explanation at this point is a good explanation, because there's so many ways you could pick apart that whole series. There's probably someone who hates everything that I've said because they think it's totally wrong, and that's the reality of it.
Well, and it's very fascinating because there's also instances where they don't show anything or they don't say anything, and that's also as interesting to me. Things like, there's scenes where there's complete silence between her parents, and you're sitting there like, what's up with her parents?
Yeah. And we find out what's up with her parents.
Yeah, we do, but it completely takes a different route. Like, I'm sitting there in the first episode, I'm like, her parents are just dysfunctional. Her dad, it literally just goes home and goes straight to the computer. And her mom's like, that's got to put stress on the mother. And I think even that, there's some context there of like social commentary of people who are just so connected to the internet online that they ignore their direct relationships.
Oh yeah, 100%. That is spot on.
So just little interesting social commentaries there, and you see that throughout this entire show, is that they'll have a scene, and I'm like, okay, that's an interesting social commentary.
Yeah, yeah, and again, just a reason I love it. So much to say, and only 12 episodes. Highly, highly recommend it to particularly psychological sci-fi fans. I wouldn't, for instance, recommend this to my mother.
Yeah, definitely. And I just go back on the music. Like, I'm loving the opening. I love the opening and the ending to the show as well. I'm a huge fan of listening to openings and endings. I'll listen to if I like it, I'll watch it every time the episode plays. I'm not someone
same.
that skips. And the opening feels very thematic as well.
Yeah, I like the opening and ending too, because I feel like it's such a stark contrast to the show as a whole. Because like you mentioned before, the soundtrack as a whole is really like ominous and kind of dark and very spacious. Then you have this opening and ending that's very raw. It's very human.
Yeah.
Compared to a lot of the rest of the soundtrack, which I think again is just the part of the genius of that show. They knew exactly what they were doing when putting all that together. It's just a beautiful piece of art in my opinion.
Yeah, and this is just a fun little trivia fact, but the opening was sung by Boa, who does a lot of other anime openings. Like, she's done fairy tale openings and other stuff. So that's the only little nugget that I know, because I listen to a lot of openings. I have like an entire playlist on Spotify of just pure anime openings and endings, because I just love listening to them.
Who doesn't in this community?
You'd be surprised. No, I want those English-speaking music. So, all right. Well, we're about approaching up to the hour mark of the podcast. So, is there really anything else that you want to talk about the anime?
Not really. I think we've gone pretty in depth with it all. Like I said, I recommend it. It's really cool. It's got a lot to say. It's just really fucking weird.
Yes,
so.
Very weird. And if you're confused or disappointed at the end, that is okay.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. Definitely not for everyone. But it's one that really resonated with me. It's probably always going to be in my top 10. And it inspired me to create something I'm really proud of. So.
Yeah, I was really fascinated with that Intergrade project. That was really cool how you went about that. So,
thank you. I really appreciate that.
All right. Is there anything you want to plug?
I am finally, after many months of figuring out how I'm going to do it, am doing a live show on Twitch.
Cool.
That should be December 10th or 11th. I don't know if I'm going to do Friday or Saturday yet. But it'll be that second weekend of December. So I will be doing a whole bunch of songs. It's going to be like a full concert of Sinewave Fox music, but it's not just going to be me pressing play and standing there singing or rapping. I've got some cool stuff planned for it. So
oh, cool.
That'll be on twitch.tv/SinewaveFox.
All right. And is there anything else you want to plug? Just go right at it if you feel like it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at Sinewave Fox on everything, Instagram, Twitter, which I'm most active on, also YouTube to go check out my music, and on Spotify, obviously. So Sinewave Fox, they are two separate words for Spotify's sake, but one word for all my handles. Come say hi to me. I usually interact with people on Twitter as long as they're not weird. Don't be weird.
Says the person who made that their first...
Well, that's a different kind of weird. I'm just being like the Twitter kind of weird. Don't be Twitter weird.
Don't be Twitter weird. That's fair. That is completely fair. So, anyways, thank you so much for coming on, Sinewave. I've been excited, and I was really looking forward to this recording. So, yeah and
well, thank you for having me, man. It's been a fun time. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And so, with all that being said, I'm the Anime Overanalyst, and I'll see all of you guys in the next video. Peace.
Bye. Subscribe or else.
Talking Nerdcore, talking nerdcore.